Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast, where we feature questions from you, the YFP community, to be answered by one of YFP Planning's fee-only certified financial planners. Before we jump into today's question, I want to give a shout out to YFP Planning's incredible team that makes this segment possible. YFP Planning offers fee-only comprehensive financial planning that is customized to the pharmacy professional. You can learn more and book a free discovery call by visiting yfpplanning.com. Again, that's yfpplanning.com. Okay, this week's question comes from Julia.
Hey everyone, I wanted to hear your thoughts on purchasing an additional disability insurance policy and life insurance policy. I'm 29 and my husband is 33, and we're expecting our first baby in March. We recently explored insurance options as we do want to make sure our family is set up if something were to happen. We also understand that insurance will be the cheapest now while we're at our youngest and our healthiest. My question is this. With student loan repayments restarting in January, as well as additional expenses that we'll be incurring, including daycare, etc., would it be a mistake to pass up additional disability and life insurance at this time? I do have supplemental life and disability through my work. However, it's not quite enough to actually cover us in the case of something happening. Any insight is appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for submitting your question to be featured on this week's Ask a YFP CFP segment of the podcast. Tim Baker, what are your thoughts?
Well, first, congrats on the baby in March. That's super exciting news. So, definitely a lot coming down the pike in terms of change for you guys. So, congrats. I would say, one of the things Julia mentioned is like some of the expenses with, obviously loans and, daycare, food, diapers, formula, all that stuff is going to be on the docket that you are going to need to kind of navigate. Also, a lot of our clients that have babies kind of navigating, extending out their maternity leave. So, saving for that. That's another thing that, is kind of top of mind. But, this part of the financial plan that you're alluding to is, we kind of stick under wealth protection. So it's typically anything related to estate planning. So that's things like wills, live-in wills, power of attorneys, which is going to be really important for you to pursue again when the baby comes, and then also insurance. And we typically the heavy hitters here are things like life and disability insurance. Mm-hmm. So with life insurance, it's one of those things that you typically want to have in place when you have a house, a spouse, and mouths to feed. Those are kind of my three things that I rattle off. For disability income, it's typically when you make income, you're trying to insure your income. And I would say, typically like a professional income, you're a trained pharmacist, that type of thing. So let's kind of talk about each of those in turn. So before we do that, I would say in a lot of cases, it's typically good to have your own policy. So most people get this coverage from their employer, just much like they would get their health insurance. So they might have a benefit that says, hey, it's 1 times income, or a flat $50,000 life insurance policy, or hey, we don't offer short-term disability, but we do offer long-term disability, and it pays X percent. So I think it's good often if you're a professional and you're starting your family to kind of look at these very seriously. So if we look at life insurance, typically what's covered through your work policies is not going to be enough. A general rule of thumb is that you want a policy that covers you 10 to 12 times your income. So if you make $100,000, $1 million policy is kind of a good base. And again, most employers won't do that. One of the reasons that it's good to have your own policy, and you allude to in the question, is like, when you're young and healthy, that's typically when your premiums are going to be the lowest. So there's a rule of 30 out there that, a healthy 30-year-old person can buy a 30-year term policy, $500,000 coverage for about $30 a month. So don't quote me on that because I'm sure rates have changed a little bit, but that's kind of like the process that I want to at least plan in your head, or the number I want to plan in your head. So it's good to kind of lock in your own policy because it doesn't matter your employment; it's portable with you. So when you change employers, you're not always going to get that policy, even if it's going to be a lesser policy in the next one. Just like certain things like pensions have kind of like dried up. This could be something that in the future employers don't offer. So age, employer, significance, what they offer. These are all going to be things that kind of lean you to, hey, just get your own policy in place and call it a day. In terms of the amount, we alluded to like the 10 to 12 times income, but there's a lot of different ways to kind of go about this. You could say, hey, Tim, like I really, like if I were to die, like I really would want the house to be paid off. I really want to make sure that I'm replacing a good amount of my income, which is a hard number to kind of, if I were to die at age 40 versus age 50,
right,
and the policy goes to 60, it's kind of like that's 10 years of earnings that you kind of have to like eyeball. But you also say like, I want to make sure that my kids, their college, is set. So you could say like, hey, it's a base of $1 million, but I think to send my kid to college, I need another $500,000. So I want, 1.5 million. So you can use a rule of thumb. You can actually go through a calculation and kind of get to that number. But 10 to 12 times is typically, what you're looking at. From a disability policy, these are the ones that are going to be a little bit more, costly. So what we typically try to like target for clients is a 60% income replacement. So that means if you make $120,000, if you multiply that by 60%, that's $72,000. Divide that by a 12-month benefit, you're looking at about a $6,000 benefit. So what you often want to do is look at what your employer offers. So say they offer a $6,000 a month benefit. You're like, great. One of the things you have to take into account with that is, all right, but that benefit, because the employer pays for that premium and they deduct those premium fees, is that it's going to be taxed. So if you're in a 25% tax bracket, you receive 75% of that $6,000 benefit. So it might be in your best interest to close that gap to basically buy a supplemental insurance policy. The other big thing that is kind of wonky with disability insurance policies is like how what's the definition of disability? Is it an own occupation or any occupation? So you typically want an own occupation, so it kind of protects your occupation. Like if you were to be in a motorcycle accident, you can't work and you cognitively can't do the job of a pharmacist, but you could, bag groceries. They could deny that claim if you have an ENEOC definition. So that's another thing is, sometimes having your own policy, but the prices of these policies can be prohibitive. And if you're looking at, a baby and expenses like that, maybe it's best to, use what your employer has or buy a supplemental policy that you can then buy up more in the future, and kind of step into that cost a little bit more. But it's definitely one, if you don't have anything, it's definitely good to have a baseline policy that provides some coverage. Because again, this is one of those things that's like, hey, it'll never happen to me until it does. And we've seen it, right? So it's a really terrible situation where you're like, okay, you go from this income to no income because you can't work. So, I would really encourage you, especially with baby on the way, to take a hard look at this, really dive into what your employer offers, and then, start to devise a plan of say, okay, this is the Cadillac option versus, okay, maybe we step into this and assess this, later on down the road when cash flow is a little bit better.
Yeah, and Julia, also to those that are listening, we've got additional information that covers much of what Tim talked about in the last several moments on our website. You can go to yourfinancialpharmacist.com. At the top of the page, you'll see a button for insurance, more information on both term life, long-term disability. And then we'll link in the show notes. We've got 2 articles, an ultimate guide on disability insurance, some examples, calculations, and then the same thing on the life insurance side. So make sure to check out both of those resources. Tim, it's a great question. And I think one of the things that strikes me as I read Julia's question, obviously really exciting time for their family, is I think it's these types of life events, right? Could be a birth of a child. It could be another major life event where it's a good opportunity to really take a step back and evaluate what are the goals, what are the plans, what's the balance sheet look like, and really just, have a fresh perspective, because you and I both know, costs of baby are real, right? Obviously ranging from the delivery, formula, diapers, clothes, baby equipment, all over the place. So those costs are real. And I think really taking a step back as you look at this exciting transition ahead to say, okay, what's changing both expense wise, what changes with other goals that may now be in the equation to play. And then, making this decision on insurance as a part of the overall vision and the plan, which might look different going forward than it has looked in the past.
Yeah. No, and you're right. It's one of those things where, it's because it's such a momentous thing in life, it does trigger that self-reflection. It's like, okay, do I have all my bases covered? And that could be a new job, a new career, whatever it is, a baby, a marriage. So definitely worth, again, we're obviously biased, speaking with a objective third party to kind of navigate those issues, ask good pointed questions, and get you. This is a thing for a lot of parents. It's just a comfort factor. Am I doing? I think a lot of people, assume because it's like, hey, it's offered by work. That's going to be enough. But it could be a nagging feeling to say, okay, like if I were no longer on this earth, or are my kids going to be taken care of, and to have that kind of checked off is a real kind of sigh of relief, kind of moment. So, yeah.
Julia, great question. Again, congratulations to you and your family. Thanks for taking time to submit the question to be featured on the show. We're going to be sending you a super comfy YFP t-shirt as a small thank you. For those that are listening would like to have their question featured on an upcoming episode, 2 ways that you can submit your questions. One, you can send us an email, info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com. You can also record your question by visiting yourfinancialpharmacist.com/ask YFP. As we wrap up this week's Ask a YFP CFP episode, an important reminder that the content in the podcast is for informational purposes only, is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. For more information on this, you can visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thanks for listening. Have a great rest of your week.